Hello and welcome to Help My Books Are a Mess. Where do I start? Sometimes the most difficult thing in QuickBooks can be identifying a problem and then finding the right fix to solve it. But luckily, almost everything in QuickBooks is fixable. Sometimes the fix isn't fun, but it is fixable. So let's jump right into it. First and foremost, who am I? My name is Jenna Wright, and I'm an instructor here for Real World Training. I'm a VIP administrator. You've probably seen me in the Q&As, but I also help to design these training courses that you see for both QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online. Now, I do have a bit of a diverse background here. My formal training is in music, actually, in education. I have 2 music degrees. But after college, my career sort of took a hard left, and I ended up working in real estate. And I have tons of prior experience in business as well. So all of that unique experience led me here. I've kind of sort of seen it all when it comes to small business, and I have been in my fair share of messes as well. Now we have a very full class ahead of us, so let's get started with what we're going to learn about. First and foremost, we are going to learn how to identify a mess. And sometimes that can be the most difficult thing, knowing what might be incorrect in your QuickBooks company file. Or maybe you're paying a ton of money for your accountant to come in and clean up your books for taxes, which that can be a problem in itself as well. So we are going to talk in detail first about what is a mess. We're also going to learn how to preserve your financial integrity for tax purposes. Now, once your taxes are filed, you cannot change anything in your books in that year. It puts you in a very bad place in the case of an audit. So when you're fixing your books, you must work within the structures and confines of taxes. Now, I am not a tax accountant, like I just said, and many times if you come into the Q&As, we may have to advise you to speak with your accountant about certain things, and this is true. Some things only your accountant will be able to answer for you, especially when it comes to which accounts you need and do not need for tax purposes. So, bit of advice from me to you here before we jump into it. Establish this relationship with your accountant and especially an open line of communication up front. Especially because at the beginning of the year or when you're trying to file taxes, things can get very busy and it can be very difficult to ask for help at that time. Now, we are also going to learn about the importance of reconciliation. Everything in QuickBooks starts and ends with reconciliation. Reconciliation is the process of confirming that what you've entered into QuickBooks and what's in the real world is the same. In fact, reconciliation is the only way to check to see that what you're entering in QuickBooks is at least half correct. So, your bank and credit card statements will be your source of truth as you work. And we're going to keep going back to that point. And also very important, not only will you be reconciling QuickBooks to your bank statement, but you're also reconciling the bank or credit card statement back to QuickBooks. It goes both ways. Now, last but not least in this class, we are going to talk about some key takeaways for future planning. How can you potentially avoid a mess in the future? So we're going to talk tips and tricks along the way and also summarize that for you at the very end of class. So how do you approach this class? You may think to yourself, there's an infinite number of ways things could be messed up in my books. Well, messes in QuickBooks tend to fall within a few different groups. So in this class, we are going to explore all of these different workflows, and I am actually going to show you how to clean up a few different company files. So to maximize learning in this class, I would highly advise you guys watch carefully and take notes. Because if you're finding that your mess is not necessarily one size fits all, I guarantee you are going to pick up a few tips and tricks in each one of these workflows that I'll be showing you. And we are also going to discuss some final thoughts and summarize everything we just did at the end of class. And if you don't find the exact fit for your issue, this class can also help you figure out which questions are the right questions to ask in our daily live Q&As. So that can also help you clean up your mess as well. So let's jump right in. What is a mess? Messes make you want to scream or throw your computer. Messes usually lead to a ton of clutter and chaos. Sometimes messes are obvious, but sometimes a mess hides underneath the surface and can be a bit harder to discover. Either way, a mess in your books can cause a lot of stress if you know something is messed up. So I'm going to point out a few examples of messes that are very obvious. But please know that messes come in many different forms, and it probably won't be quite as obvious for you. There's a lot of nuance here. So the idea of this class is to start showing you what to look for. And once you know that, you'll be able to better diagnose your problem or work with us in VIP in the daily live Q&As until we diagnose the problem together. So you know which steps you need to take to fix them. So how do we define a mess? Bookkeeping is historical record keeping. I call it the Hansel and Gretel principle, right? In bookkeeping, you're always going to move forward, leaving a trail of what happened behind you. So how can you identify a mess? Number one, if you know something is incorrect. Like, for example, if account balances on the chart of accounts are off, this is actually the biggest indicator that you might have a mess in your books. Or maybe you know that many transactions got recorded incorrectly. Another way to identify a mess is to take a look at your reconciliations. For example, if your reconciliation beginning balance is off, if you have a bunch of unreconciled transactions, if you have a bunch of duplicated transactions, etc., that is a good indicator that there's a mess in your books and it's time to find and fix it. Just because you're able to reconcile doesn't mean those reconciliations are correct. So we are going to keep going back to this point. And a third indicator of a mess here is if you actually have no idea what's happened behind you in your books. It doesn't always mean it's wrong. For example, let's say you're just starting a new job and you're taking over for a previous bookkeeper. You might not know what they've done in the past, but remember, bookkeeping is historical record keeping. So you always want your books to tell you why you spent or received money. And without some key details, it's very difficult to answer that why question. So even with no prior knowledge of a transaction, you should be able to look at it and know exactly why it was recorded. Now, when you're dealing with messes, there could be things I like to call snowball problems. These are small problems that can turn into bigger problems over time. It can create a further mess or uncover a very deep mess in your books. As a link right now on this page, you will actually be able to download a flowchart to help clean up your messes. And I will be referring to that flowchart throughout the rest of class. So let's look at some examples of messes. I've pulled some reports in QuickBooks. Now, these are from QuickBooks Desktop, but financial reports are all going to tell you the same information regardless of what they look like. And when you're looking for a mess, usually a great place to start is on the balance sheet. Now, I want to point out a few fields that could potentially indicate a mess here. For example, let's take a look at our checking balance. Do you notice here how this is a very large negative balance? That is definitely an indicator of a mess. We have obviously recorded some transactions incorrectly. Usually, the checking account will have a positive balance, or at least hopefully it should. QuickBooks should always mirror what's happening in the real world. So this is not a great sign for us right now in our QuickBooks. Another account here, accounts receivable. You notice how my accounts receivable balance here is very high? That is also an indicator of a mess. That might tell us that maybe our sales transactions are being recorded incorrectly. And maybe we should take a look further into this account and figure out why this balance is so high. Maybe our customers don't actually owe us $2.8 million in the real world. Another account that could potentially hold a mess is undeposited funds. And if you notice here, my undeposited funds is also very high, about $1.1 million. And there is a lot that could potentially go wrong in undeposited funds. So if you're noticing a very high balance or even a negative balance in undeposited funds, that's an indicator of a mess. Another account here which could indicate a mess would be something like accumulated depreciation. For those of you who don't know, this account should actually have a negative balance. Depreciation measures the useful life of a fixed asset. So if something is being used, it needs to take away from the value. My accumulated depreciation here is positive, and that is not a good sign. So maybe I'm recording depreciation wrong. Or potentially accounts payable. This could also help us uncover a problem as well. You notice how my AP here is also negative, and it's a pretty large negative balance. That definitely tells us we are recording our accounts payable transactions incorrectly, like bills and bill payments. So we should investigate that further. Another indicator of a mess here, I know we've got a lot, loans. Loans are something that you owe to others outside of your business. It's not the other way around. So if you see a negative balance for a loan, that means that the lien holder actually owes you. And that's not how a loan works. So your loan balances should pretty much always be positive here. This is an indicator of a mess. And last but not least, here on this balance sheet, equity. It's always a good idea to take a look at your equity accounts and make sure those balances make sense. And take a look here at my owner's equity. Now, this is pretty high, $1.5 million. Owner's equity represents the money that the owner has given to the business. It's the owner's investment into the business. Owner's equity can also include things like owner's draw, the money the owner takes out of the business to pay themselves. Now, if this balance is higher than you think or potentially lower than you think, you may have a mess on your hands as well. Now, just on this one balance sheet, we have 6 examples of potential messes. So it's a very good idea to dive deep into these reports and really ask yourself, do these balances reflect what happened in the real world? Here's another example of a balance sheet. Now, this one also has an issue with the checking account, but it's sort of the opposite problem as the last balance sheet we took a look at. Look at this checking account's balance. You notice how high it is? The checking balance in QuickBooks should at least be very similar to what the balance is in the real world. And if your real world bank balance is not this high, then that is a good indicator of a mess in your books. Also on this balance sheet, take a look at accounts receivable. You notice how it's negative? That definitely tells us that something is going awry in our AR with our sales transactions. So keep an eye on those balances. And if something doesn't feel right, you may want to investigate it further. Now, there could also be a ton of different problems that occur on the balance sheet. Like, for example, do you have a bunch of different accounts on this report that have no meaning? You don't know what they're for. Or maybe are your tax liabilities way off? These are just a few examples so you can start training yourself to know what to look for. Your balances are a great place to start. Another great place to do some investigation is on the profit and loss. But be aware that messes on the profit and loss can be a bit more difficult to spot. You need to know a little bit more about the business in order to analyze this report in more detail. It's not quite so obvious here as it was on the balance sheet. So let's take a look at a few examples, starting with our income. Now, I want you to notice with the income accounts on this report, you notice how 2 of the income accounts have a very high balance and 2 of the income accounts have a pretty low balance. This tells us, okay, maybe there's something off here. Now, this could be totally accurate, but if it's not, then you would need to take a deeper dive into your items or products and services, or maybe your income is being recorded incorrectly. Maybe it's being duplicated. This is definitely an indicator that there could be a mess here. Also, there are specific accounts here like depreciation. Depreciation as an expense account actually should be positive. It's a negative on the balance sheet, but a positive here on the profit and loss statement. Negatives here definitely tell us that there is something being recorded incorrectly with our depreciation. And negatives on the profit and loss statement typically only show up for accounts like a discount account, not depreciation. So we should look into this further. Another indicator of a mess here on the profit and loss would be totals. Look for totals like total income, cost of goods sold, or total expenses. And maybe if you know your expenses are higher or lower than what this report is saying, that can potentially indicate a mess as well. Another example on a different profit and loss here, an account like payroll expenses. Now, payroll expenses are tricky because when you're running payroll, you're not only dealing with expense accounts, but usually you're also dealing with liability accounts as well. So if your payroll expense account is crazy high, crazy low, or even a negative, that could be an indicator that maybe your payroll is being recorded incorrectly. Mine is crazy high, so I should definitely take a look at that and maybe also look into my payroll liabilities. And that could help us catch a mess. Also, another really special account here would be something like reconciliation discrepancies. Now, this is a special account that is only used to create an adjustment when you force a reconciliation to happen. Now, sometimes a reconciliation adjustment is necessary, and I will actually be demonstrating that many times over the course of this class. However, if you can, you typically want to avoid reconciliation adjustments at all costs. So if you have a total here in this reconciliation discrepancies expense account, that could be an indicator of a mess. And pay special attention to this because ideally, this will always be zero. Now, mistakes don't just happen on our financial statements. Mistakes can also happen, or messes can also be created on our lists. So let's take a look here at an example of a vendor list. I want to point out here, you see how some of my vendors have some negative balances, and even Bank of any city has a super high negative balance. That could absolutely be an indicator of a mess. Pay special attention here because specifically with vendors, if we have negative numbers, this means we have more bill payments or vendor credits than bills. Things aren't lining up or things aren't being recorded correctly. So we need to really key into what's happening. And the opposite could occur as well. If you have a really high balance and you know you don't owe that specific vendor that much money, that could also be an indicator that something's being recorded incorrectly. Another example here would be on the customer list. And same thing. Look into your customers that have negative balances because that tells you that some sales transactions are being recorded incorrectly. On the flip side, if you have some customer balances that are very high and you know they don't owe you that much money, that is also an indicator of a mess. Now, last but not least, you can also look for messes in reconciliation. This is actually the best place to check yourself. Everything is going to start and end with reconciliation. So let's say, for example, I am trying to reconcile for January of 2021. But take a look here at all of these unreconciled transactions from 2020. This is a huge indicator of a mess. And this is one of the most obvious places that you're going to see a mess. So definitely pay special attention during your reconciliations. And this will be a point that we continue to come back to over the course of this class. So let's get started fixing some of these problems. First and foremost, and most importantly, where do we start? We always want to begin fixing a mess by asking ourselves one important question. When was your last reconciliation? Remember, everything we do in QuickBooks is going to start and end with reconciliation because this is the ultimate check of everything. In the real world, we have bank statements and credit card statements that tell us exactly what happened in that account. Those are our source documents, and we are going to always go back there. So, when was our last reconciliation? We have two choices on how to answer this: any prior year or the current year. Now, how can we check this out in QuickBooks? In QBO, there are actually two ways that you can find this out. Now, first and foremost, if you scroll down on the left-hand nav bar, select Accounting and then Reconcile, you can find your last reconciled date under here, under Add the Following Information. And the last statement date I entered was June 30th of 2020. Now, let's say we are trying to clean things up for 2021. So 2020 would be a prior year. And looks like I have quite a bit on this page that I need to pay attention to. So we'll circle back here. Besides this, there is one more way to tell when you last reconciled. If on the right-hand side here you select History by Account, you can see all your prior reconciliation reports. So I can see right now here, my last statement date occurred in 2020 because my report period is set to all dates. And if we expand this out, here are the prior reconciliation reports, which we see leave off in June. So my last reconciled month was June of 2020, and I have no reconciliations on the book since. Okay, so we just uncovered a little bit more of a problem. So what happens when our last reconciliation was in a prior year and we have nothing on the books since? Well, there's one more very important question we have to ask ourselves. Have we filed taxes yet for that year? We were trying to clean up 2021, and then we realized 2020 wasn't quite done yet. Now, unfortunately, there's no way to just automatically look at QuickBooks and know this. So if you do not know the answer to this question, you must ask your accountant or tax professional. And after asking them, I have not filed taxes. My business has not filed taxes for 2020 yet. So do you see what I'm getting at here? These are kind of snowball problems. This started as something small. We just needed to clean things up for 2021. And all of a sudden, now we have to go back to 2020 to the root of the problem and fix it. Maybe we weren't with the company in 2020, but we discovered something much bigger at play. So this is a perfect example of a mess. We've got account balances that are wrong. We don't have reconciliation on the books, but it's all fixable. So how are we going to fix it? We are going to, yes, we have not filed taxes. We are going to choose a date to true up the numbers and then force a reconciliation in the previous year. Now, it is crucially important that you have those source documents in front of you. The real world bank or credit card statement is the source of truth, especially for prior years when you might not remember or even know what happened at the time. So let's choose a date to true up the numbers, let's force a reconciliation, and let's begin cleaning this up. So which date should we choose to true up the numbers? It looks like I have reconciliations on the books all the way through 2019 into half of 2020. So a good place to start is wherever you left off. Here I have June 30th of 2020 as my last reconciled date. And if we select reconcile again, I can see that over here. So I can see also that my account isn't quite ready to reconcile yet. So we do want to fix things up as of that date so we can continue moving forward, having correct reconciliations on the books. That is our goal, but we have to do a little bit before we can get there. And QuickBooks is telling us right off the bat what we need to do. So let's assess the damage. The big question here, if we're going to try to reconcile as of that date moving forward through June and July, how does our beginning balance look? And obviously you can tell here our account isn't ready to reconcile yet because our beginning balance is off. Let's go ahead and select We Can Help You Fix It, because this is always a great starting point when we're assessing the damages so we're able to reconcile. So here, perfect. It looks like I have 3 transactions in this list, and unfortunately, they were deleted. Now, this list that QBO gives you shows you any transactions that were edited or deleted since your last reconciliation. And so, if we're sort of examining what's happening here, if this doesn't look too bad, then maybe we can fix them so we're able to move forward in our reconciliations. If not, though, we may need to enter an adjustment. And actually, we're going to examine what an adjustment looks like in later topics in this class. For me, though, just dealing with these 3 transactions, that's actually okay. I have a received payment transaction in the amount of $24,610 that was deleted. I also have another received payment in the amount of $18,114 that was deleted, and I have a check transaction in the amount of $1,471.99. Again, that was deleted. That is just 3 transactions. So I'm going to make the choice here to fix that so we can move on. And let's take a look at how we can fix it. Whenever you have transactions like that were previously reconciled and then were deleted, it is always important to take a look at those source documents so you can make sure that you're proving exactly what happened in the real world and are matching that to QuickBooks at all time. So taking a look at our prior bank statements for April and May of 2020, those transactions actually happened. So I don't know why they were deleted in QBO, but because they happened in the real world, they must be in QuickBooks in order for our books to be right. So what's our step forward here? Now we need to recreate those transactions. That way we'll be able to reconcile moving forward. The big question is, though, how do we recreate them? And one important tip and trick I want to show you here is, before you do any kind of recreating, always search through your books so you know what happened in the past. And remember, we're always going to move forward in bookkeeping, leaving a trail of what happened behind us. So if you don't already know about this, when you select the magnifying glass, it shows you your last 10 previously recorded transactions. But if you want to go back a little bit further, you can select the advanced search. Now be aware the advanced search does have a time limit, so transactions that are older than a couple of years unfortunately will not show up here anymore. You will have to pull a report to see them, but I'm just dealing with 2020, so what I want should be right here. Now I want to make sure that the transactions I recreate haven't already been re-recorded. If they've already been re-recorded, maybe they just haven't been reconciled, and that's a completely different scenario. So let's do a little bit of searching here. In the advanced search, exactly where we are, we can apply a number of filters to find specific transactions. Now, right now, I know I'm looking for a received payment transaction, but I'm going to search all transactions, because if we don't necessarily find what we're looking for, maybe we'll find something that was recorded wrong. But besides that, we can also select what we want to search by. Instead of reference number, let's search amount. And I'm going to start with the first payment transaction that we saw for Amy's Bird Sanctuary. The amount that we're looking for is $24,610. And let's select search here. And wow, it looks like we have a ton of transactions in that amount. Okay, wow. This might be a little difficult to search through. So to make it a little bit easier on yourself, you can also apply additional filters. Like, for example, a date filter. So maybe we're just going to search the month of April in 2020. So let's say April 1st through April 30th, and then select apply. And this will narrow down our search results, and perfect timing here. I am finding one invoice, but I'm not finding a payment. So maybe the payment got deleted that should have been applied to this invoice. Now's the point where we need to confirm that in the real world. So go back and check your real world source documents, bank statement, credit card statement, and real world records of the payments that you receive from your customer. And turns out This payment did exist. It's on the bank statement as of April of 2020, and I have my customer record, so the customer did pay this invoice number 36. It just accidentally got deleted in QBO. It happens. So what are we going to do now? Let's go ahead and re-record the payment. Now I selected to open this invoice, and from this invoice, we can select receive payment over here in the corner. And now we're going to copy the real world details that we have. This payment was made on April 9th of 2020. It went into our checking account, and it was a payment for this invoice number 36 in the amount of $24,610. Let's select to save and close this, and we are good. Now, if we were to refresh our page with all of those filters, we would be able to see both transactions here, and we could also see that in our register as well. So let's go ahead and look for our next payment. I'm going to go ahead and take away the amount and type in $18,114. We were looking for that payment as well. And I'll leave on the date filter because I know this transaction did occur in April. So if we click search, ooh, this is interesting. I've got an invoice for Otero Animal Training in this exact amount that occurred on April 25th. I also have a transaction here, a payment recorded for April 28th. And again, it's for Otero Animal Training. Now, if I'm looking at my bank statement for April of 2020, this payment did occur in this amount with this customer on this date. But my QuickBooks said it was deleted. So here's where we need to do a bit more research. This is one of my favorite tips and tricks. Let's scroll down and go to the chart of accounts. I'm going to select accounting chart of accounts from the nav bar. And then let's open the register for the bank account we're working with. Let's select view register here. And I'm also going to add a filter. Let's select a filter here by dates. So I'm going to select from April 1st and to April 30th. And let's see if we can't find that transaction in this register. Now, if I'm searching through, oh, there's the Amy's Bird Sanctuary. Let's keep going. There it is. I have a payment recorded on April 28th, and it's appearing right here in this register. But I do want to point out one more column. Do you see this small column that appears within the deposit and balance columns over towards the right-hand side of my register? All of these symbols that we're seeing in this list do give us a bit of context about what's going on with that transaction. It's called a status, and it actually informs us of the reconciliation status. And R in this column means that the transaction has been reconciled. And if I see nothing here, that means it has never been reconciled. Now, there is one more symbol that you can potentially see here, and that is a C transaction. And if you see a C, it stands for cleared, which means it hasn't been put through a reconciliation yet, but it has been reconciled or added through online banking. Now, this transaction has nothing, so it's never been reconciled. Maybe somebody deleted the payment and then recreated it, but just never went in and re-reconciled it. This would contribute to that beginning balance being off, but luckily there is a fix here. Now, what we can do is actually change the reconciliation status in this register, but big asterisk here. Do not do this to reconcile. To actually complete a reconciliation, you have to be in the reconciliation window. Select reconcile and go from there. But if there's just one transaction and it was previously deleted and needs to be re-reconciled for a second time, what we can do is here in the register, select that small status column. And right now we'll see nothing appearing here. What we can do is select it and change that C to an R, and then select save. Now, QuickBooks tells us this transaction you're editing is linked to others. Are you sure you want to modify it? This transaction is linked up to that invoice that we saw. So I'm going to select yes. And then QuickBooks is really warning us against doing this. So again, this is not how you reconcile. This is just to fix this one thing. So let's select yes. And there we go. Now, what that just did is pre-reconciled the transaction, so it'll already be checked off when we go complete our mini reconciliation in just a moment. But we have one more transaction, the check that was deleted. So let's do a little bit of searching around here as well. Now, another good thing to do here, if we select the magnifying glass and go back to the advanced search, now, when we're talking about physical checks written out of the company's bank account, they're always going to have a check number, right? So when you're searching for a check, it's a good thing to do to search instead of by amount, by reference number. And the check number that we were looking for is actually 1718. 1718. And let's select search. Now I'm searching for this, and unfortunately, we're going back 2 years here, and this transaction was not found. This transaction was originally dated in May of 2020, and it's not found here. And that's probably a good thing. If we're not finding any connected transactions, that means there's no bill or anything out there. Now, of course, we could always search the amount, and you could refer to your real-world documents as well, but I know that check got deleted. It wasn't connected to anything else, so I'm just going to re-record it right now. So let's select New and then Check. Now, this check was written to Hall Properties, so let's go ahead and type them in again here from the bank account. And the original check date was May 14th of 2020. And again, refer back to those real-world source docs. My check number is 1718. I'm going to go ahead and collapse that down. This check was for office rent. In fact, Hall Properties is our landlord, so let's go ahead and type in our office rent account. And the original amount that we're recreating here is $1471.99. And it's also a good idea on these transactions to enter a memo. Anything that you recreate, it's a good idea to just type that you did that. Recreated to reconcile. And let's go ahead and save and close. There we go. Now let's go ahead and head back all the way down, back to our reconciliation screen. And you'll notice something. Our beginning balance is off by less. Before, our beginning balance was about $40,000. And now with the addition of that extra payment that we reconciled in the register, that caused our beginning balance to change. And it's actually off by less. If we select, we can help you fix it. We can see it right here. Now, in this log, it's still going to show us the 3 transactions that were previously deleted, and it's going to continue to show us this until we complete our next reconciliation. But look at this one. The received payment transaction we recreated for Otero Animal Training now says reconciled and registered. This is the new transaction that we just recorded. So yes, it was deleted previously, but we reconciled something manually in the register, which actually brought the total discrepancy difference down. That's good. Now, we could do the same thing here with the deleted check as well as the other received payment transaction that was deleted. But I want to show you one more way you can do this besides just manually reconciling these recreated transactions in the register. So let's click done. And this is what I like to call a mini reconciliation. This so comes in handy in so many different scenarios. So what we're going to do here is take the last date this was reconciled. This account was reconciled. So that would be June 30th of 2020. And we're going to pop that date down here in the ending date field, June 30th of 2020. Now, the next thing we do is in the ending balance field, we are going to put in our goal, what our balance should be. So if we go ahead and open up that bank statement, this is for July, but the bank balance on July 1st is the same as the bank balance on June 30th. So our beginning balance here should be $81,000 approximately. Let's copy that number into this ending balance field. So 81,607 and 40 cents. And watch this. I'm going to select Start Reconciling. And there we go. QuickBooks is going to think about it for a second and pop us into our reconciliation screen. And here are those 2 transactions that we recreated. When we check them off, if all the math works out, you will have a $0 difference. We are accounting for those transactions that were previously reconciled and then changed. Because we changed them back, we recreated them in this case. Now, when we complete this mini reconciliation, I'll select Finish Now. And congratulations, we did that. When we go back into our reconciliation screen, it's still going to tell us our last reconciled date, which is June 30th, but our beginning balance is now right. And you'll notice there's no more "we can help you fix it" big red box here on this screen because we already took that into account. So we trued up the numbers, we forced our reconciliation, we got everything to work out. What's our next step to clean up this mess? Our next step, like we mentioned before, everything starts and ends with reconciliation. So we're going to reconcile from this day forward, reviewing banking information and correcting as we go. And what I mean by that is we are going to correct any wrong transactions. We're going to record any missing transactions, and we're going to delete any duplicated transactions. Now, this process, all of this, is what I call reconciling as normal, because all of these things you should always do every single time you reconcile. When you reconcile, you're not just reconciling QuickBooks to the statement, but also you're reconciling the statement to QuickBooks. It goes both ways, so we should be dealing with every transaction we see. So let's go ahead and do just that. So now I've rearranged my screen to show us both our QuickBooks and our bank statement at the same time. Let's go ahead and proceed through a reconciliation as normal and see if we can continue to clean up our mess as we go. This can be a tricky process because you might know that you're working with mistakes during this time period, but it's really hard to gauge until you actually go through it yourself. So I always advise folks, when you're working with a mess, just jump in, get started, and we're going to deal with everything as we see it. So let's go ahead and enter our ending balance that we see on this statement. It's going to be $189,296.31 as of July 31st and 2020. Let's go ahead and scroll down and start reconciling. Now, we're going to see all of these different transactions, and we can go ahead and readjust the screen to see a little bit more. There we go. I just zoomed out a little bit so we could see our total dollar amounts, and I'll rearrange these columns. If you didn't know, you can make these bigger or smaller. The lines are kind of invisible, but it's still possible to do. So you can be sure that you're seeing what you need to see on this reconciliation screen. And like I mentioned before, we are going to deal with everything as we see it. So let's go ahead and get started. I like to work with deposits first since that's what's on our bank statement. Now, the default sorting in this window is always going to be based upon date. And QuickBooks does mix in payments and deposits all together here, but you can select this filter here in the middle to just see deposits or just see payments. I like to work with deposits first because that's what appears first here on our bank statement. So let's rearrange the columns to be able to see a little bit more and get started. First, let's start with July 2nd. My first deposit is $17,120. Here's July 2nd, and here's $17,120. It's the same in both places. I'm going to check it off, and you can see that makes a difference. So that's going to make a change in our difference. Now, I'm going to go a little fast through this, but be sure when you guys are reconciling, even reconciling as normal, that you're being very careful here to go very slowly and methodically so you can make sure you're catching all potential mistakes or anything in the moment. All right, our second deposit here on July 9th, 24/6/10, July 9th, 24/6/10. Next one, July 14th, 11/4/24, July 14th, 11/4/24. You're doing good so far. All right, July 15th, 1,349. July 15th, 1,349. Great. All right, July 21st, 5,000. July 21st, 5,000. But I'm noticing something else. Look at this. On July 21st, there's another $5,000 transaction. One is a receive payment, one is a deposit. So because those are both in the same amount, this is a red flag. When you're reconciling, if you even just get a hint of a red flag, you want to do some investigation. Because remember, we need this to be perfect. This is our source of truth. So anytime I see something that raises that red flag, I want to open up these transactions and dig a little bit deeper. If you can see on our bank statement, the $5,000 only appears once. So why is it in QuickBooks twice? First, I'm going to select this deposit transaction and select edit, and that'll take us right there. Now, it looks like this did occur on the 21st of July. It's from Dietrich Motors, but I just have here in the account field an income account. This is not connected to an invoice. Now, it is in the amount of $5,000, so let's investigate the other transaction and see, is it the same or is it different? If we scroll down here, there's the receive payment. Let's click edit. And looks like it has the same customer name and the same date. But this transaction is connected to an invoice. This is a perfect example of a duplicate, and it happens more frequently than you might think. Sometimes somebody in a company will record a transaction using all the normal workflows. And then maybe somebody else comes in and they don't necessarily know the workflows and they record it as a duplicate transaction. Or maybe somebody thinks that this transaction is not with an invoice, so they record it as income, and that essentially duplicates the income for the company. Or maybe even somebody manually recorded a transaction and somebody else added it through online banking, and that adds a duplicate. I mean, these are just 3 examples of how duplicates can happen. It's so easy for it to happen. So I do recommend here, anytime you see one of these duplicate transactions, you investigate. And I'm going to look back in my real world documents. This only occurred once. There's no reason for the duplicate. So we want to keep the transaction that's connected. Keep the one that's connected to the invoice and get rid of the one that's just a deposit with income because that wasn't recorded properly. So let's select that, select edit. This is the duplicate. We do not need it, so I'm going to select more and delete it. QuickBooks always asks us if we're sure. I am, so I'm going to select yes. Perfect. All right, and now we have this one transaction in the amount of $5,000, just like the bank statement. Perfect. So let's keep going. Next one, also on July 21st in the amount of $3,120. So here's my other July 21st. And now I'm seeing something else. The amount on the bank statement is $3,120, and the amount of this transaction in QuickBooks is $3,102. It's suspiciously similar. In fact, 2 of the numbers are just transposed. So again, that raises that little red flag, and that means we need to deal with this, investigate it further in the moment so we can clean up the mess. I'm going to select the transaction and edit it. And this is the best way to tell the history of what's happened. Remember, bookkeeping is historical record keeping, so we should have the details here that we need if we recorded it properly. Now I can see I received this payment from Eric's Foundation and Roof Repair on the 21st in the amount of $3,102. But take a look at this. The invoice, the original amount is $3,120 and the open balance is $3,120. So maybe this is just a typo. It happens to all of us. This is the point where you want to go back in your real world records, find that payment that the customer made to you to prove this is in fact a typo. I do that, and yes, I just transposed 2 numbers. So we're going to fix it up here in the amount received. Let's just flip the 2 and the 0 and do the same thing down here in the payment column. There we go. It actually changed on its own. And now we can go ahead and select Save and Close. Yes, it's okay that we're changing this because it was my mistake to begin with. And now we can go ahead and reconcile it. All right, perfect. We are almost done with our deposits. Next one occurred on July 23rd, $33,138. July 23rd, $33,138, and no cents. Perfect. This looks great. Let's click to reconcile it. Next one, July 28th, $18,114. July 28th. And all the way at the bottom, July 28th, $18,114. Perfect. Next one, July 30th, $6,908.63. And I've got that recorded in QuickBooks on July 28th. And I want to point this out because as you're reconciling, the date should line up exactly. But it's very common you might have a scenario where you've recorded a transaction in QuickBooks and then it takes a couple of days in the bank to clear. So as long as the dates are relatively around the same time and all of the other info matches up, then that date discrepancy is okay. Usually the clear date is a bit later anyway. So let's click to reconcile it. And last one here, again, we've got on the 30th, $5,100. The 28th, so slight date discrepancy again, but $5,100. Perfect. All right, so we have accounted for all of our deposits and only what we see here in the screen. We dealt with everything in the moment. That's exactly what we should have done. So let's go ahead and flip over and take a look at our money out. And I'm going to change this filter from deposits to payments. So our first money out transaction is check number 1646 to Hall Properties. So let's check this out over here. The date 7/14/1646. It is to Hall Properties, even though it's cut off, and the amount $1471.99. $1471.99. That's the same. We're going to click to reconcile it. Next one, 1647. Here, dated the 8th, that's the same. A1 Leasing, that's the same. And 1697.05, yep, that is correct. Let's reconcile it. All right, moving on down to now our online payments. Here on the 11th, we've got 8928. So 8928, there we go. That's the same. Again on the 11th, now we have 2960. 11th, 2960. Perfect. All right, next one on our bank statement, we've got the 25th of July in the amount of $250. And that's not here. Now, it did occur at the end of the month, so maybe we recorded it on a different date. That's wrong. Let's do a little bit of investigating, because if it was recorded in this month, it would be here due to this filter. By default, QBO automatically adds a filter for the statement ending date on your transactions, which means any transactions that occur after this statement ending date will automatically not appear in the reconciliation window. This is to help you streamline things and not see too much clutter here. Now, of course, we could take that off, but that would show us a lot of different transactions, and that might be a little too much clutter. So let's go back to our magnifying glass. Best way to search for things. And let's select Advanced Search again. And let's change this to search by amount. Let's say $250 and click search. Now we can see we got a lot going on here. So let's add a date filter. And maybe let's say for all of July. So 7/1/2020 to 7/31 of 2020 and select apply. And look at that. We're just searching by amount. We're not searching by transaction type. I've got a bill recorded on July 10th, so maybe this bill payment belongs to this bill. So this is the point where we want to go search through the real world records. And it turns out I did make an online payment to our merchant services company, this vendor, for this bill about 2 weeks later after the bill occurred. And I just never recorded it in QuickBooks. This is an example of a transaction that's missing. It's on the bank statement, so it should be here in QuickBooks. And I didn't catch it before, but I'm catching it now since we're reconciling. So let's go ahead and record that. I'm going to select the bill, and up here in the top right corner, let's click Mark as Paid. And now we're going to make sure that this payment is on the right date in the right place. So this transaction here should be dated 7/25 of 2020. That's the date it cleared the bank. Let's add a reference number here that says online and make sure the checkbox is checked next to the bill it should apply to. This looks awesome, so let's save and close. And now let's go back here to Accounting, Reconcile, and select Resume Reconciling so we can pick up where we left off. And if I select the Payments filter again, now this transaction is going to appear here. It's the same in both places, so I can click to reconcile it. And last but not least here, we have one more transaction for ADP on the 30th. That's for our payroll. I processed payroll in QuickBooks on the 28th. It clears 2 days later. That's in the same amount, so we can check to reconcile it. And once I did that, let's go back to seeing all transactions. You notice our difference is now 0. But not only that, every transaction in this list is accounted for. We dealt with all mistakes as we saw them. We corrected those wrong transactions, recorded any missing transactions, and we also deleted those duplicated transactions. And it just so worked out where everything is now 0. Reconciliation is a puzzle, so as long as all your numbers are right and the math is right, it should always have no difference if you're matching to the bank statement or credit card statement exactly. Let's complete this reconciliation by selecting Finish Now, and congratulations, we reconciled this account. We are ready to move forward. And again, moving forward is that normal reconciliation, correct as you go. Reconciliations are about unreconciled transactions as well, not just the ones that you reconciled. So always check in with what's on screen and be sure you're dealing with everything you see in the moment. Let's take a look at another example of a mess. And let's circle back to this question here. Have you filed taxes yet? Remember, when we were taking a look at when our last reconciliation was, it was a prior year. And let's say in this example, we have filed taxes for that prior year. What do? Remember, we always need to preserve our financial integrity. So if you've already filed taxes for any fiscal year, unfortunately, that means you cannot make any changes in that year. And if you don't know the answer as to whether you've filed taxes or not, remember, all those tax questions should be asked to your accountant or tax professional. They're going to be the experts there and will be able to tell you all of that information. So we need to clean up that prior year, but we've already filed taxes for that year. And we have one more question to ask here. Did we use our QuickBooks information to file taxes? Now, both answers here, yes and no, are going to be pretty similar. If we did use our QuickBooks information to file taxes, we still need to clean things up so we're able to reconcile in the current year, but this means, unfortunately, we cannot touch that prior year. So we would need to make adjustments in the current year that we're trying to clean. And we are going to force this to be as of January 1st or whatever the first day of your fiscal year is. Now, let's say you didn't use your QuickBooks information to file your taxes. Maybe you're using another accounting software or Excel or something like that. Well, this means you can make an adjustment in the prior year, and you would want to date this the last day of that prior fiscal year. Now, let's say in our case here, we have already filed taxes and we used our QuickBooks information to file those taxes. So we need to make our adjustments as of January 1st. And again, you can verify this by asking your accountant or tax professional. Now, the good news is whichever path you take here, once you've forced your reconciliation and you've made those proper adjustments, both of these paths lead to the same goal. The only difference is going to be the date of our forced reconciliation. So let's jump into QuickBooks and take a look for ourselves. So here we are in QuickBooks, and let's open up our bank statement from our goal date. I used QuickBooks to file our taxes for 2020, so I need things to be correct as of January 1st of 2021. And we know we need it to be correct as of January 1st because that's the first day on our bank statement, January 1st, 2021. Now, if we scroll down here on this statement, we can see our beginning balance is about $67.5K. This is our real world source document. This is the source of truth. So we need to force QuickBooks to get us set up so we're able to reconcile this statement correctly. When we get into QBO and we scroll down on our nav bar, selecting Accounting and then Reconcile, you'll notice a few things. First, we can see the last date that we've reconciled. And unfortunately, my company file was last reconciled in June of 2020. and hasn't been reconciled since. Our last statement ending date was June 30th. So I've got quite a few months to catch up on. And my beginning balance, obviously, that's not going to be the same as what's on my January bank statement. So what can we do? We cannot touch 2020. So we are going to do a mini reconciliation to force QuickBooks to be correct as of that date we need. This is going to feel a little weird, but just follow along with me. On the reconciliation screen, we need to start entering the data from our January bank statement. So the ending balance will be the beginning balance as of the date you need. So the beginning balance on January 1st, and again, this is the beginning balance. This is $67,503.55. So let's type that in, $67,503.55. And the ending date is actually going to be the starting date as of the statement we want to reconcile for us, January 1st of 2021. So let's just type that in, 1/1/2021. Once we have entered that starting date in the ending date field and the beginning balance in the ending balance field, let's scroll down and select Start Reconciling. Now, this screen might look a little overwhelming because we are going to see all of those transactions that have not been reconciled from 2020. If you scroll down, for me, I've got a ton that we're working with, and that's not so easy to look at. So the first thing we're going to do, and the first thing you'll notice, is that QBO automatically has this statement ending date filter, which means it's automatically going to exclude everything after this statement ending date, January 1st of 2021. If I scroll down to the very bottom in this list, we'll have a few transactions on that date, but nothing after that date. And that is good. And the next thing we want to take a look at here is, do you see this small circle here on the right-hand side of our screen above all of the other individual circles? Our job here is to clear out all of those old transactions without making a change in the prior fiscal year. So I'm going to select this circle and select all transactions at once that appear here. QuickBooks is going to say, hey, are you sure you want to do this? I'm going to select yes. And now every single transaction that appears here will be checked off. Now, this is awesome, and this is great because with just one click, we are reconciling pretty much every transaction we need to reconcile, but we also need to verify with the bank statement. So I want us to check out two things. Let's go ahead and split our screen here. Now, here's the key point. We want to make sure that we are reconciling only the transactions that do not appear on this January statement. Because why? Our goal is to clear out all of these old transactions. We're cleaning up a mess, and this is a great way to be able to do so. Odds are your accountant already took this into account for that prior fiscal year. So we just need things to be correct as of that first date we need. But here's the problem. If we were to accidentally reconcile a transaction that appears on this statement, then we're going to throw all future reconciliations off, and that's a bad thing. I zoomed out a little bit so we could check to make sure all these January 1st transactions don't appear on the statement. So they all are payments. Let's scroll down to that here. We've got some checks, and I'm going to zoom out even more. Some checks paid here. First transaction occurred on the 8th, $1697.05. That does not appear here. Second one on the 14th, $1471.99. That also does not appear here. And our first transactions from January here when it comes to other payments on the 11th, $8928 and $2960, and they also don't appear here. Awesome. But we also want to do one more thing just to triple check ourselves here. Remove the statement ending date filter and be careful when you do this, because once you remove this filter, if you have any transactions that you've categorized in online banking, they'll all automatically be checked off. So you want to uncheck them if they appear in the future. But it will show us all of the other transactions that have not been reconciled. We can see from January going forward. So again, if you're using online banking, Make sure that the transactions that are checked off are only the ones from that prior fiscal year before any transactions you see on this statement. And that you're scrolling down to verify that you don't have any other transactions that you categorized in online banking checked off here. And if I'm scrolling down, I'm seeing no other checks, so I am good. So let's go ahead and go back. You want to pay special attention to the cross from that period of time. So December into January of 2021, because that's where we're trying to clean up. And you want to also make sure that the transactions that are not checked off are the ones that appear on the statement, especially towards the beginning of the month. So let's go back to our deposits. First one is on January 2nd, 7120. Here's January 2nd. Well, it's 17,120, so maybe that's off by 10K, but that is probably the same transaction. And same thing here on the 9th, 14,610. This one's 24,610. So again, we know we're dealing with a mess, but that's so close that I'm going to call that the same transaction as well, so we can clean it up here on our next reconciliation. And let's just also verify with the payments that occur at the beginning of the month. All right, back to the check on the 14th, 1471.99. Here we go, 14th, 1471.99. Check on the 8th, 1697.05. Check on the 8th, there we go, 1697.05. Looking good. How about these two on the 11th, 8928 and 2960. 11th, 8928, 112960. Perfect. So even though this probably felt very strange, we just did our check to make sure that we are only checking off those transactions that did not appear on this statement. These transactions that are checked off all occurred before the statement. Now I reset our statement ending date filter so we would clear out all those transactions. Let's go ahead and maximize this window. Now what you'll notice is that we have a difference. And that's okay, because in this scenario, we are cleaning up a whole year. For us, the last time we reconciled was in June, and now we're jumping to January. This is not normal, and you should not do this unless you follow that workflow. You asked yourselves, okay, I know I have a mess to clean up. When was our last reconciliation? Have we filed taxes? Yes. Did we use QuickBooks Info to file our taxes? Yes. So we've got a ton of transactions to clean up. Ordinarily here, this difference is a bad thing, but in our case, we need that difference. We are going to record a reconciliation adjustment with this difference to essentially force QuickBooks to match our balance in the real world. And at that point, we'll set ourselves up to be able to reconcile from the date we specify, January 1st onward. Now, again, this is absolutely something that you should not do on your own. Verify this with your accountant. Say, hey, I'm cleaning up all of 2020 to get things set up to reconcile as of 2021. So I am going to enter an adjustment as of January 1st of 2021. Now, of course, replace what I just said with all the details, but run this by your accountant so they're fully aware of what you're doing here. And once you proceed, everybody's on the same page. This is the thing that you need to do, which it's one of the only ways that you can go forward. What we're going to select is this small arrow next to Save for Later and select Finish Now. Now, QuickBooks is going to warn us. It's going to say, whoa, your difference isn't zero. That's correct. We're reconciling about 6 months since we cannot make any changes in that prior fiscal year. So QuickBooks is telling us, okay, we'll adjust this for you. Here's the date of that adjustment. And you'll notice that'll be the same date as our goal, that January 1st date. That's perfect. Now we need to select Add Adjustment and Finish. And let's take a look at what happens here. Let's click Done. Back in our reconciliation screen, you'll notice a few things. First, QuickBooks readjusts our last statement ending date. That now says the 1st. If we were to go back and look at our statement, January 1st is that starting date where we needed things to be correct. So this date is also correct. And also, if we verify side by side here, our beginning balance is the same in both places. So by recording that adjustment, we've forced our beginning balance to be correct as of the first date we need without affecting that prior fiscal year. So we are doing good so far. Now, the big question I always get is, where can you find this? What did we just do? This reconciliation adjustment can be found in two places, and I want to show you the accounting behind what we're doing. So let's select reports. And the first place we'll be able to see this is actually on the profit and loss. Now let's go ahead and set the right dates here. So let's just take a look at January of 2021, since that's where the adjustment occurred, and select Run Report. Now you'll notice here that under your regular expense accounts, there is one called Reconciliation Discrepancies. This is where those dollars go. This is where that adjustment went to force our balance to equal what the balance is in the real world. Now, this is the kind of account that's very obvious for your accountant to spot because of this account name. All accountants are going to know what this means. And you can easily, even if they don't know how to work QuickBooks, you can easily pull this report for them and show them, okay, as of January 1st, this is the adjustment that I had to record. So they can adjust it later and do what they need to do come tax time. Now, the second place to see this is on this transaction itself that QuickBooks automatically recorded for us. And the easiest way to get there is to select the total under a reconciliation discrepancies account on the profit and loss. And you'll see here an adjustment. Do you see that number, ADJ? Let's go ahead and click on that to take a look at this transaction. QuickBooks records a transaction using the reconciliation discrepancies account in that amount. And you'll notice that it affects both the bank or credit card account as well as that reconciliation discrepancies account, and automatically even gives it a transaction number of ADJ. So you can look on the actual transaction itself to be able to find this as well. Now, I know that felt probably very strange, and this is not a normal thing you should do. Under all circumstances, you need to reconcile as normal, but when we're dealing with a mess, that's not always possible. So this adjustment that we just recorded is our way to make sure that we can go forward as cleanly as possible. Now, even if you're just a little bit unsure of what you're doing, pop into the Q&A and ask us. We help folks just like you with this kind of thing all day, every day. So say, I think I need to create an adjustment as of January 1st of 2021 because we've already filed taxes for 2020 and I need to clean things up going forward. And we can take a look at your books and confirm, yep, that's exactly what you need to do, or tell you a different course of action. So you've got the VIP Q&As. They are daily, every business day. So please don't hesitate to use them and just double check what you're doing along the way. After you record that adjustment though, what's our next step? Both of these lead to the same path. We're going to reconcile as normal from this point. We're going to reconcile from that date forward, reviewing our banking information and correcting as we go. And again, correcting as we go is going to mean correcting any wrong transactions, recording any missing transactions, and deleting any duplicated transactions. We are set up now in QuickBooks to be able to reconcile for January. We've got our statement ending date. We can pop in there January 31st. We can enter our statement ending balance as of January 31st and correct as we go. And that is exactly how we proceed forward. Let's take a look at another example of a mess. And this time we're actually going to circle back to the very first question that we asked ourselves. When was our last reconciliation? Remember, we had two answer choices, any prior year or the current year. Let's hop into QBO and take a look in this company file. Now remember, we can check that by selecting accounting on our nav bar and then reconcile. And look at that. Looks like our last reconciliation date is in the current year, June of 2021. And if we were to select history by account, we would also see all of those prior reconciliations as well. So looks like we need to continue reconciling there for 2021. So let's see where we go from here. We know our last reconciliation is in the current year. So what's the next question we have to ask ourselves? Is our next beginning balance correct? Let's find out. Now, if this is your first time reconciling for this period, of course, you'll see that here in the Begin Reconciliation screen. Let's click Resume Reconciling because remember, we can also check that here by selecting Edit Info, and there's our beginning balance, $81,607.40. If we check out here the July bank statement, up here at the top, we see our statement period is July 1st, 2021 through July 31st, 2021. And our beginning balance, $81,607.40. Looks like that is correct. So we may have a mess on our hands, but at least we're set up to reconcile. So yes, our next beginning balance is correct. And where do we go from here? Now, we're going to reconcile as normal. And remember, we are going to correct as we go. Now, regardless of what happened before, reconciliation is the ultimate check of everything we do. So if we know we have a mess, but we can get into reconcile, that is the best possible scenario. So we can fix things as we go. Let's go ahead and jump back into QBO and enter the information on our bank statement to be correct. So I'm going to start here. Let's copy in our ending balance. We can see on the left here, this is $189,296.31, and our statement ending date was July 31st. And let's open up the side by side with our bank statement. All right, so we've got our statement ending date filter on. Let's go ahead and start with deposits. And remember, we are going to deal with these transactions as we go. Now, I'm going to go through these transactions a little bit quickly for demonstration purposes, but you should go very slowly and thoroughly to make sure that you're catching all sources of potential mistakes at the time that you're reconciling. We're not just reconciling QuickBooks to the statement, but we're also reconciling the statement to QuickBooks. It goes both ways. I actually am going to change course a little bit and start with our payments because we have less of them. So first things first, let's start with the checks that we paid. Here we have check number 1646 on 7/14 in the amount of $1471.99. So here's 1646 on 7/14. And let's go ahead and resize our window a little bit so we can see some more. There we go. I know that's small, but now we are able to see a little bit more information here on this reconciliation screen. So I've got $1471.99. That is the same in both places. Perfect. Next check, 1647. 7/8 is the date and 1697.05. 1647. 7/8, 1697.05. Perfect. All right, we are ready for the online payments. First one on the 11th, 8928. The 11th, there we go. There's the 8928. Awesome. Second one on the 11th, 2960. 11th to, well, red flag. You know what that means. The first sign we see a red flag, we need to dive into the transaction and look into a little bit further so we can correct as we go. Here's the red flag I'm seeing. On my bank statement, this transaction on the 11th is in the amount of $2,960. In QuickBooks, this transaction on the 11th is in the amount of $2,906. Two numbers there are transposed. So this is giving me a little sign of concern. First thing we're going to do is select the transaction and click Edit. This opens it up so we can take a look at the transaction in full screen. And here we want to do a little digging. You always want to go through the real world transaction, the real world statements, the real world receipts, whatever real world documents you have, because that's how you prove that what you entered into QuickBooks is correct or potentially incorrect. And let's say I'm going through my real world online payment history. Turns out I just made a typo in QuickBooks. I accidentally transposed these two numbers. So now we're going to fix it, and I'm going to do that by switching the 6 and the 0 around and saving and closing. And now we'll be able to reconcile that. Here's the date, and here's the amount. Date, amount. Awesome. There we go. And last but not least, here we've got a transaction here, 730-288. Oh, wait, we've got two more. 725, $250. See, you see how easy it is to potentially make a mistake, so be sure you're being really slow and thorough. I've got 725 here, $250. That is the same. But why that threw me off is because I assumed it was the last transaction. but it actually wasn't. Our last transaction, according to our statement, is an ADP transaction from the 30th in this amount. And that's not here. That's not here in QuickBooks. So we know what we need to do when we see something on the bank statement that hasn't been into QuickBooks. Let's dig in. Let's search around and see if potentially we've edited it, we've deleted it, we've entered it. What's happened with it? Best thing that we can do is select the magnifying glass icon and go down to the advanced search. We'll come right back to reconciliation. Let's search all transactions and change this to search by amount. Let's say 2887 and 68. But when we select that, we can see we've got a lot of transactions here in this amount. So we also want to add a date filter. Let's say July 1st of 2021 through July 31st of 2021. And when we click apply, nothing's found. So at this point, we've searched in our QuickBooks, haven't found anything. Now we need to go through the real world records and figure out what happened to this. In the real world, I paid this as normal, just like I do every month. I just forgot to record it in QuickBooks. So let's go ahead and take care of that now. I'm going to click plus new. Let's record an expense. This is to ADP from our checking account, and the date here is 7/30 of 2021. Again, we're just copying what's happening in the real world. The category I use for ADP is always payroll expenses, and the amount is $2,887.68. So now if we save and close, and let's go ahead and go back to Accounting Reconcile and resume our reconciliation. Filter down to payments. Here's that transaction. Now, I know I moved a little fast through all of that. So key points to take home here: always check your real world documents, always be thorough, and always make sure you're searching for every possibility. All right, let's go ahead and click to reconcile it. Perfect. And those are all of our payments. Now let's flip over to our deposits because we have a little bit more to work with there. First deposit I see here on the 2nd, 17/120. Here's July 2nd, 17/120. Awesome. Next one, July 9th, 24/6/10. July 9th, 24/6/10. Looks great so far. Okay, third one, the 14th, 11/4/24. The 14th, 11/4/24. But you notice a problem here? I have two transactions in this amount. 11/4/24. They both occur on the same date. Here's the problem though. One's a deposit and one's a receive payment transaction. Which one's right? What's going on here? Is this a mistake? Let's skip it for now and see what else we can reconcile. I'll circle back. Okay, so the next transaction was recorded on the 15th in the amount of $13.49. 15th, $13.49. Okay, let's reconcile that. Next one, the 21st, $5,000. Here's the 21st. I can see I have a few, and another red flag. $5,000 here, $5,000 here. It only occurs once on my statement. So again, I'm going to pause it, come right back. Okay, so next one on the 21st is $3,120. So $3,120 on the 21st. Yep, that's the same. Check it off. Next one, 7/23, $33,138. 7/23, $33,138. Okay, we're getting there slowly but surely. Next one, 7/28, $18,114. And same problem. 7/28, one's a deposit, one's a received payment. They're both in the same amount. So again, this is something wrong. I'm going to skip it and come back. All right, last but not least here, we've got the 7/30, $6,908 and 63 cents. And again, okay, this is definitely an indicator of a mess. We've got a deposit in this amount on that date and a received payment in this amount on that date. Whew, okay, got to pause there. Last one, 7/30, $5,100, 7/30, $5,100. That is the same. Okay, so let's circle back now to the transactions that we skipped. And all of these appear to be duplicates. In fact, we have 4 pairs of duplicates. This is a sign that someone is entering things wrong into your company file. And unfortunately, now it's your job to clean it up. So make sure that you're reviewing all of the proper workflows for mastering QuickBooks Level 1 so you know how your income and expenses should be recorded. If you're following proper workflows, that's a great way to cut down on some duplicates. Now, we don't know exactly what happened here, but generally following all the proper workflows increases your chances for things to be correct. So let's dive in and figure out how these things could be incorrect. And remember, we do want to deal with them in the moment. So before I move on, this is what I'm going to do. So starting with this first one, 11424. According to our statement, this transaction only occurred once. So we always want to click and edit the transactions to see what's going on. So I'll start with the received payment. Let's select edit. Okay, so this is a payment from Bill's Windsurf Shop. It is in the amount here of 11424. Yep, and it does line up with invoice number 74. Okay, so this looks normal. This looks exactly like a normal received payment transaction. So let's dive in and check out the deposit now here. Let's select it, select edit. Okay, same date. And I see that it's from Bill's Windsurf Shop, but this time somebody put an income account on this deposit. This is a big problem. When you're recording your income properly, you've got an invoice and a received payment transaction, and then deposit money from the received payment. That's how you normally, and that's how you should record your income. If you were to put an income account on a deposit when an invoice already exists, essentially you're duplicating your income, which is a really bad thing, especially for tax purposes. So you really want to avoid that at all costs. Maybe somebody came in and they needed to record these deposits, but they didn't know an invoice already existed, or maybe they just didn't know the proper workflows. This could pile up and be a really huge problem. I mean, this month alone, we have 4 instances of this. So what do we want to do? How do we want to deal with this? It only occurred once in the real world. Our next step, check your real world documents. I'm checking the real world payments, maybe the real world checks I received from this customer. And in the real world, I find out they also only paid me once. So now we have to deal with it in QuickBooks. This is a duplicate, this bank deposit transaction. So we're going to delete it. We can select more and then delete. And yes, I am sure. So now this transaction on the 14th only appears once in QuickBooks, just like on the statement. We can go ahead and click to reconcile it. Perfect. Now I have a feeling it's going to be the same story with the other transactions, but let's dive in and make sure. So next one is this $5,000 transaction. Let's click and edit it. Okay, this is a received payment from Dietrich Motors, and yep, it looks just like a normal received payment transaction should. It's connected to an invoice. Let's open up the deposit and edit. Look at that, same thing. We've got an source documents. Customer only paid me once in the real world. We've got it once on our statement. Bank deposit's a duplicate. Let's delete it. More, delete, and select yes. Perfect. Now it's the same in both places. Let's click to reconcile it. 2 more, and I think I know what's going to happen. So next one, let's look at the 18114. Let's click on the received payment. This one's from Otero Animal Training, connected to an invoice. Looks good. Let's take a look at the deposit, edit. And again, not connected to an invoice. This one's connected to an income account. So check the real world. They only paid me once. Let's delete this in QuickBooks. This is a duplicate. Delete, yes. And now we'd like to go ahead and select to reconcile that. And last one, we are almost there. Let's check out the received payment transaction first. Edit. This is from Ruval Pickling Company. It's connected to an invoice. This looks awesome. The second one here, if we look at this deposit, let's edit it. And it's also connected to an income account. So check the real world documents. Ruval Pickling Company only paid me once in the real world. It only occurs once on our statement. This bank deposit not connected to an invoice is also duplicate. So let's select more and delete and click yes. And now we can click to reconcile it. And look at that, our difference is 0. We are ready to reconcile. So let's go ahead and select finish now. And success, we reconciled this account. We are now set up to be able to reconcile going forward. And remember, we always want to correct as we go. So when you're reconciling as normal, be sure you're correcting any wrong transactions, you're recording any missing transactions, and you're deleting any duplicated transactions. That way you're reconciling QuickBooks to your statement and your statement to QuickBooks all at the same time. So let's look at another example and circling back here. If our last reconciliation is in the current year, what if our next beginning balance is not correct? Let's take a look for ourselves. So hopping into QBO here on our nav bar, let's select Accounting, Reconcile. And right off the bat, I can see our beginning balance is off. Now, the last time we reconciled was on June 30th, so let's go ahead and pull up that statement. Here's our balance as of July 1st, same as June 30th. It should be about $81K, and unfortunately right now, it's off. Now, luckily, QuickBooks has the we can help you fix it, but let's see what our next step is according to the workflow. If our next beginning balance is not correct, we need to ask ourselves, do we know why? Now, this question is a little bit easier to answer in QBO due to this. Whenever your beginning balance does get off, QBO usually gives you this big error message here on the reconciliation screen that says your account isn't ready to reconcile yet, but we can help you fix it. And if we select that, I can see 3 transactions that I accidentally deleted. So that would be why, if they were previously reconciled, that would be why our beginning balance is off. Okay, so let's say yes, we do know why. What are we going to do? Fix it. So let's go ahead and do so. We know when we're dealing with deleted transactions that were previously reconciled, first thing we should do, go back and check the source documents, check the bank statement, check your real world transactions and see, did these actually occur? And if they did, they were deleted by mistake and should be recreated in order to get that balance back up to where it should be. Now I've got 1 check transaction and 2 receive payment transactions. But as always, whenever you're dealing with deleted transactions or even edited transactions, your first step should always be to find and make sure that they haven't been re-recorded yet. So magnifying glass up in the top right corner and then select Advanced Search. Now, all transactions, the reference number, let's go ahead and search for that check first. Check number 1686. That was the one that was deleted. And there's nothing here. Now, we could go ahead and search by amount, and in fact, you should. But I know this was a check that we just wrote out of our company file. It's not connected to anything else. I checked my real-world source documents, and it actually did occur. So let's select to re-record here a new check transaction. Now, we're just going to copy the information according to how that transaction happened in the real world. Look at the bank statement, look at the real world image of the check that you have, and copy it all into QuickBooks. So the payee for this transaction here was Bonnie's Gardening Services, came from the checking account. This transaction originally occurred on May 11th. It was check number 1686. Oops, if I typed that right. And I spent this money on materials costs. Last but not least, the amount, $8,928. And we can select to save and close. Awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look now at the amount. And for our other 2 transactions that were deleted, because they're received payment transactions, they're a little bit harder to find. So the first one that was deleted was in the amount of $33,138. And when we click search, woo, that brings up a lot of transactions here. So remember, you can always set an additional date filter. This transaction occurred back in May of 2021, so I'll do May 1st to May 31st and select apply. And look at that. I've got an invoice here, but I don't have a receive payment transaction. So this is where we stop and we go back to the real world. Check the real world records. Check the bank statement, check the real world payment records that we keep, maybe check images from our customers or a list of all of the payments that we've ever received from our customers. And we can see that at the time, that payment that was deleted did belong to this invoice. It was just deleted in QuickBooks for whatever reason. So we need to go ahead and re-record that. I'm going to click on this invoice, and then up in the top right corner, we have receive payment. Let's click on that. And now we can recreate this transaction by typing in the original date of the transaction, May 23rd, and this was a payment on this invoice. So we can go ahead and now save and close. Perfect. All right, one more. The other one was a receive payment transaction in the amount of $18,114, and let's click search. Oh, and again, we find an invoice without a payment. So pause, go check the real world docs. In the real world, the customer did pay me for this invoice, and it did occur on the bank statement. So it got deleted. We have to re-record it in QuickBooks. Now let's select receive payment up in the top right corner again. This time, let's enter the date that occurred, 5/28 of 2021. And this is a payment for just invoice number 182. So sometimes QuickBooks does some strange things on this screen. Just make sure that you are looking at every field, like the amount received, as well as the payment column, to have it all read the correct amount. And we can go ahead and save and close. Awesome. Okay, so let's click accounting and go back to our reconciliation screen. Now back here, our beginning balance is still going to be off, which is correct because we recreated those transactions, but we haven't re-reconciled them yet. Now, a couple topics ago, you learned how to re-reconcile a transaction in the register, which is totally useful in this situation as well. But let's say you don't want to do that. Let's perform a mini reconciliation to get everything back to where it should be. And in this mini reconciliation, what we're going to do is find the last time we reconciled, which is June 30th of 2021, and copy that into the ending date field, so June 30th of 2021. And then in the ending balance field, we are going to enter the correct beginning balance according to our statement. This is our goal, to be able to have this number be our beginning balance. So I'm going to select here $81,607.40. I just typed that in to enter it and click Start Reconciling. Now, automatically, you'll notice QuickBooks has that statement ending date filter on, which in this case is fine because here are the 3 transactions we just re-recorded. So all you have to do is go down the line and reconcile them and check it out. That brings our beginning balance back to normal. You see this? This is a $0 difference. This is a mini reconciliation. It's not a full reconciliation. So let's click Finish Now and Done. And now back in the reconciliation screen, we've got the correct statement ending date, and now we have the right beginning balance. We're ready to reconcile moving forward. So that brings us to our next step. After we fix that beginning balance, what do? Reconcile as normal. And remember, we're going to correct any wrong transactions, record any missing transactions, and delete any duplicated transactions as we go. So let's take a look at one more example of a mess here. When was your last reconciliation in the current year? Is your next beginning balance correct? Let's check. I'm going to open up QBO and we're going to select accounting and reconcile. So we last reconciled here in June of 2021. Our beginning balance is about $65K. So if we open up that bank statement, that is not correct. It's about $81K on the bank statement. So we've got another problem. The question is, do you know why? And we looked at last time what happens when we knew why. Remember how we had that big error message here on the screen that said we can help you fix it? And so we recreated those transactions. Well, this time we don't necessarily know why. We don't get that information here like we did that said we can help you fix. We just know our beginning balance is off. And we can also go back and check history by account, and I'm seeing some concerning things here as well. There haven't been changes to reconciliations, but there have been a ton of adjustments to reconciliations. So maybe I don't know the history of that. Maybe all of this information tells me nothing. I just know it's wrong. And also, I do want to point out that things might be wrong here in the reconciliation screen, but you always want to confirm it with the chart of accounts. If you're in the chart of accounts and you know you have a bunch of account balances that are wrong, like me, I have over $1 million in undeposited funds. I have negative $500,000 in accounts payable. I have a negative loan. I have $500,000 in owner's draw. So all of these are things that are concerning. And that, coupled with the fact that we have all those reconciliation adjustments, it might not tell you that something is wrong here on the screen, but there still could be something wrong. So the question is, do you know why it's wrong? What if we don't? We don't know why. We just know that it's wrong. So our next step is going to be to assess the damages. We need to review our reconciliation history reports. And also in QBO, if we can select we can help you fix it here on this screen, if we get that big error message, we should select it. Now, sometimes you'll click on that and there's only a few transactions. And like we saw in the last example, you'll just fix those on up, do a mini reconciliation, and get yourself back on track. Sometimes when you open that error message up, there might be a million transactions listed there, and they might not all be fixable. In our case, we still want to make sure we're clicking history by account here. And taking a look at these prior reconciliation reports, yes, there have been no changes. However, look at all of these auto adjustments. This means whoever was reconciling before forced the balances to equal each other using that reconciliation discrepancies journal entry like we saw earlier. And that is a huge red flag. That is a sign that somebody's doing things wrong. If you have an adjustment to correct a penny, okay, maybe you can talk about that with your accountant. But I have 4 adjustments, and all of them are in the tens of thousands of dollars. This one's over $100,000. So what happened? What was going on there? This is the sign, as we're assessing the damage, that there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and it might not all be fixable. So after we assess those damages, the question is, can you fix it? Now, if you've taken a look at the We Can Help You Fix in your reconciliation history reports, and you can fix it, what are we going to do? We are going to fix it. And then from there, we're going to move forward reconciling as normal, just like we've seen. When we fix it, we're going to do a mini reconciliation. We're going to recreate any transactions. We're going to fix things up. And then, of course, correct as we go. Sounds great, right? But in my case, it runs a little bit deeper than that. So what if you can't fix it? Maybe this was a mess caused by the previous bookkeeper. Maybe this is a mess that is just so vast and you don't have time to fix it. Maybe you have a week to get things ready for taxes. This is a huge problem. Maybe you weren't with the company, so you don't know why or how it happened. And if you've been digging around to try to find out and you're not getting any answers, then we have a few more questions to ask. The next question is there a good reconciliation in the past that has not been changed? And here in QBO, this is where this history by account screen is going to be your best friend. You can take a look at those prior reconciliations and see, okay, which ones haven't been changed. And specifically, you want to look at the auto adjustment and the changes columns. Changes show us things that have been edited or deleted. I don't have any of those. But in auto adjustments, yeah, I've got 4 months worth of those. So dig through these reports thoroughly. And if you select View Report, that gives you more details about each individual reconciliation. But going back through, I can see February and January, they have no changes and no adjustments. So if I'm taking a look at this February report, this should line up with my bank statement exactly. Nothing was changed there, and that's a really good sign. So what do? We've got a little bit of hope here. Now, I want to simplify what we see on screen because we're pretty deep into the fix now. When we're assessing the damages, figuring out that we can't fix things, is there a good rec in the past that has not been changed? What happens if we're at the worst case scenario? And no, there are no good reconciliations this year. We are just in too deep of a mess and we don't know how to go forward. In this case, what we're going to do is force a reconciliation. And that's doing one of those mini recs that we talked about earlier. When we force a reconciliation, let's go back to our reconcile screen. We're going to do exactly what we did before, where you enter the same date here as the last statement ending date in the ending date field. We're going to force it as of that last reconciled date and enter the ending balance as the correct balance we're going for. We'll clear out all the transactions that are older so we get everything's correct to move forward. Now, if, let's say, for example, your last good reconciliation was in the prior year, then instead of forcing the reconciliation as of the last reconciled date, you'll force it as of January 1st. But either way, once you force the reconciliation, then you can reconcile normally going forward, correcting as you go, because that'll help you clean up that mess and every month moving forward. Awesome. Now, we've already forced a reconciliation like we've seen in many of the topics in this class so far. So let's look at a different scenario here, because we already saw in our history by account reports, we have 4 months that are wrong, but February and January, they looked good. They lined up with our bank statement. All looked great there. So what happens if you do have a good reconciliation in the past that has not been changed? So what we're going to do is undo our reconciliations. Undo them to a point they're correct or to the beginning of the year. Now, let's take a look here, because this is where things get tricky in QuickBooks. In QBO, we need to undo reconciliations back to February. But pro tip, unfortunately, as a regular user of QBO, you cannot do this. In order to undo reconciliations in QuickBooks Online, you must have a QBO accountant account. This is a free QuickBooks account, and it is the only version of QuickBooks Online that allows you to undo reconciliations. Now, pause here, because as a document on your screen right now, you can go ahead and open that, and there are step-by-step instructions in a video that tell you how to sign up for a QBO accountant account, and then how to log in as the accountant and go ahead and undo those reconciliations. So if you need steps on how to do that, you will find that help document right here. Go ahead and follow those steps now. Once you've signed up for a QBO accountant account, though, you're going to invite yourself as the accountant in your company file. And you can do that by selecting the My Accountant tab here on your nav bar and add your accountant. Or if you already have one, you can select the gear icon, and then under Manage Users, you'll find a tab that says Accounting Firms. And this is where you can find all of those accounting firms that you've invited. Usually the limit is 2 or 3. Now here is my accounting firm, and I can see here their status is active, which means they've accepted my invitation. They're ready to work in my company file. So let's switch into QBO Accountant and undo these reconciliations. And again, check that document on your screen right now to figure out how to sign up for that account. QBO Accountant is a special version of QuickBooks Online. Again, it's free and it's chock full of tools to help accountants do their job. But it's also chock full of tools to help us as regular users if we find ourselves in a bind, like needing to undo reconciliations. What we'll want to do once we're signed into QuickBooks Online Accountant, you can see that up in the top left corner. It tells you Accountant right there. You'll select Go to QuickBooks and then select your client, which is your company that just invited you. You should see your company name in this list. And once you do, QuickBooks is going to sign into that company, but with these special accountant tools. You can see it still tells us we're in QuickBooks Accountant, but we are now in our own company file. So because we're logged in to this company with the accountant account, we get some special tools here by selecting Accounting and Reconcile. Now let's go ahead and select History by Account, and we can see the exact same screen that we were just in. This time though, if you select the action column here on the far right-hand side of your screen, and you click the drop-down arrow, you'll get a little message that says undo. So I know February is right. Let's undo these 4 reconciliations so we can move forward from that point cleanly. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to select our first reconciliation that's wrong here. It's got a $17,000 adjustment, and I'm going to select undo. QuickBooks is warning me. It's saying, hey, are you sure you want to do this? We are. That's the only way to undo these reconciliations so we can move forward cleanly. I'm going to select yes, and then QuickBooks again wants us to confirm. We'll click undo and success. So now we can see that disappears from this list. And once we undo the reconciliation, it was like it was never done before. And so we'll keep doing this back to the point that things were right. So for example here, let's go ahead and undo the rest, and we'll click yes and undo again. There we go. The May reconciliation's gone now. April's is really bad, so let's select drop-down arrow, undo, yes, and undo again. Perfect. And last but not least, March's. Drop-down arrow, undo, yes, and undo again. Perfect. Now we only have 2 reconciliations on the books for 2021, but if we go back to our reconciliation screen, our beginning balance is now right. Our last statement ending date was February 28th. We've got $67,503 and 55 cents. If we go ahead and pull that bank statement here, flip over to March, and let's zoom in. Check out our beginning balance as of March 1st, $67,503.55. So we just got rid of all of those old wrong reconciliations with those crazy adjustments, and we're ready to start at this point and move forward. And what do I mean by moving forward? Well, as always, we're going to reconcile as normal. And this way we can clean up our mess in the moment without having to delete or edit transactions after the fact, and without having to record any of those messy reconciliation adjustments. We're going to correct any wrong transactions, record any missing transactions, and delete any duplicated transactions. Now, I know this was a lot. All of these different examples that we just looked at were absolutely insane. Each topic you just watched was filled with a ton of information. And just so you know, it's actually impossible for somebody to have all of these issues happening at once in the company file. I just showed you 5 different examples of how to fix certain messes. You'll never have all 5 at the same time. You'll probably have 1 at one time. So I want you to follow this workflow when you're dealing with a mess in your own company file. Ask yourself these very important questions and know where you are in your workflows. And always remember, everything you do in QuickBooks starts and ends with reconciliation. It's not just about what you reconcile. It's about what's also unreconciled in the reconciliation window. You're not just matching your bank statement to QuickBooks, but you're also matching QuickBooks to your bank statement. So when you're looking at your bank or credit card statement, all of the transactions should be checked off here. And side note, printing out and using an actual pen and paper is a really great way to make sure you are physically checking things off on your bank statement. But that's not it. Not only should all of those transactions on the statement be reconciled in QuickBooks, but everything that's still not reconciled in QuickBooks during that time frame needs a careful eye. And if it's something that's going to be reconciled in the future, leave it in the window because you're going to deal with it later. But if not, you always have to do research to know why those transactions are there. I have to mention that QuickBooks is a double entry accounting system. Each transaction that you record affects at least 2 accounts. So there's still a chance that you could correct all of this and something could still go wrong. But as long as you're reconciling correctly in all of your bank and credit card accounts, you know that at least half of every single transaction you've recorded is correct, the bank or the credit card account. And it's a lot easier to change an expense account on a transaction than to fix 100 different checks written from and reconciled in the wrong bank account. And always, as you're reconciling, be sure you're correcting any wrong transactions, recording any missing transactions, and deleting any duplicated transactions. Reconciliation is always the key. So you want to set yourself up to be able to reconcile. And once you're reconciling, deal with everything you see. Now, to review this workflow, this is the document that you downloaded. This flow chart is going to be your best friend as you're cleaning up your messes. Going through everything on this flow chart at once can be very difficult, and it's hard to sort through this to know what you actually need. So follow the flow chart. Ask yourself these questions and know if you're any sort of a mess, which path you need to follow to eventually get to the point where you can reconcile going forward. And remember, reach out for help. That's what we're here for in the VIP. If you ever have any questions about what's going on in your books, of course, look at your account balances, but reconciliation is always going to be a great place to start knowing what your questions are. So let's discuss some key takeaways for future planning. Now, first and foremost, and I cannot stress this enough, reconcile. Be sure you are always reconciling, because that is the best thing you can do for yourself in your books to make sure things are on track. But also pay special attention to those transactions that are not reconciled. Be sure you're reconciling monthly and deal with those transactions that are not reconciled before you ever finalize a month's reconciliation. Also, be sure when you're working in QuickBooks that you're being consistent and develop a schedule. Accurate bookkeeping is all about schedules and consistency. If you find a way to get accurate records that you can keep consistent, then guess what? QuickBooks is working the way it should for you. Bookkeeping is repetitive. It has to be. So stick to your schedule. Stick to that consistency. And if you are being consistent and have a schedule and something weird is still happening in your books, ask questions. That's why you have VIP, so you can join us in the daily live Q&A sessions. We can help you dig into any sorts of problems or tell you the right questions to ask your accountant if you have a tax question come up. Always ask us before you try something new, because I promise it's a lot easier to confirm that what you're doing is going to be correct rather than just to try something, have it be wrong, and not catch it until a year later when you're in crunch time. We can confirm your workflow and help you make adjustments before you find yourself in a mess. That's what we're here for. We are your QuickBooks insurance. And all of you in this class are doing a really great thing by seeking out this extra education. Just wanting to learn is half the battle. So keep learning, keep asking questions, and we will be with you every step of the way. And with all that being said, that does bring us to the end of class. Thank you all so much. I wish you an absolutely wonderful rest of your day, and I cannot wait to see you in the VIP Live Q&As. Best of luck while you clean up your books, and happy QuickBooksing.